Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
Wartime London's Bonnie and Clyde, the crime spree of Betty Jones and Karl Hulten that shot across wartime London. It is the new book by Prash and Melissa Ganendran, and I'd like to say that the intrepid crime-fighting duo join me live on the line now. Good afternoon. Well, good afternoon from us. Good morning to you two this morning. How are you all doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah,
Thanks.
pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
You've done this sort of thing before, haven't you? You are this sort of crime-fighting team, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so that's right. We're a husband and wife team. I'm very much the researcher. Melissa does the writing. We also run a true crime podcast and we write books, and we've been doing that for about 6 years now, I'd say. Yeah. So.
Here's the thing. Why are we so fascinated? Because you mentioned the podcast, and I live in a house full of, I live in a house full of women, luckily, and they like nothing better than a true crime podcast or a true crime. What is it about our psyche that we want to hear about crimes? Is it to explain it if you could, please?
Yeah, I think with the human nature always likes or loves a puzzle to get into the nitty-gritty of why people do things. And they've also got a morbid curiosity as well. And I often come across that when I speak to some of my, sort of running the podcast, speak to some of my listeners, they're always very interested in why people do things, what their backstories are, how they got there. And on the other hand, you do have the other types of true crime fans who are very much interested in the forensics aspects of things and the investigation. Some of them like the more gorier aspects of the crime, I would say.
Yeah, I think for us, though, we do really like to try and get into the backstories of the people involved, and particularly with this book, with Wartime London's Bonnie and Clyde, that was one of the things that drew us to it, really, was how these two people could become and fall into this position. What started it?
Because one of the things, I suppose, is we think of, wartime Britain as being the Blitz and everybody behaving properly and,
yes,
uprightly. And, of course, it wasn't like that because it was blackout. Most of the men were away. A load of people were having to sort of hustle, to put it mildly, to make a living. And this is perfect grounds for criminality. So explain, set the background, if you will.
Yeah, so, do you want me to do this one?
Yeah, you go.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, in 1944, when Hulten and Jones met for the first time in a cafe in Hammersmith, at this point, crime had gone up about 50% compared to before the war. Obviously, you had the blackout regulations in place. There were numerous road traffic accidents. And you also had the influx of the foreign troops, American and Canadian soldiers that come in preparation for the D-Day landings. And as a result of this, you had this seedy underbelly of crime as well going on, with the police force depleted. You had more opportunity for criminals to loot, to assault, and obviously there was the black market aspect. We had the rise of the spiv, for example, the chap with the pinstripe suit and the pencil thin moustache, didn't we? Which is
I'm thinking Arthur Day. I'm thinking the great Arthur Daly, circa or George. What was the actor?
George Cole.
Thank
Cole.
you very much. The ultimate spiv, 1950s, yeah, exactly.
Yes. And that's really what did it. And I think you also had the rise of the good time girl as well, which is effectively a label for these young women who went to seek gratification, shall we say, from the troops. And they would socialise with the troops. They'd be given gifts, things like ration goods, things like chocolates, nylon stockings, that type of thing. They'd go to the dance halls, and it was seen as a very much a negative mark against them, and that's why they got this label. Because during the war years, most women were actually doing their bit for the country. They were working in the munitions factories, working as ARP wardens. But you had this seedier aspect to it, and that's where obviously Betty and Karl come into this, really.
But if you think about it, I mean, yes, it's all very, very noble, the whole thing. But if you're, if you're a 19-year-old girl, and it's not like, being a 19-year-old now, very conservative, very boring background, and suddenly all the men have gone away, you've got rations, and suddenly the Americans and the Canadians turn up, and they're all fit-looking guys, and they've got wonderful uniforms, and they've got jazz and swing music. I mean, if you're not fully committed, or you're a bit flighty or flirty, then, hanging out with an American for cigarettes and nylons and whatever else is a little bit enticing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And for Betty in particular, I mean, she'd grown up in a working class family in Neath in South Wales. And she later described it as a one-horse town. She found it really boring. And she had always dreamed of being a dancer. She liked that idea of the glitz and glamour, so she ran away multiple times, ultimately ran away and ended up in London. So that's how she sort of entered that environment of dancing in nightclubs. She did end up doing a couple of striptease acts as well, and that's how she got into that seedier side. But I think there was that element of excitement. Everything was new and flashy. They've got chocolates, silk stockings and things that British men could not afford.
And also you've got that, because these are young men about to go off to war, a lot of them haven't seen a woman or whatever. So they certainly haven't travelled to Europe before. And so to be, they don't want to go to the Royal Shakespeare Company or go boating on the Serpent or whatever, do they? They want to see women. They are men after all. And so you're catering for a market that's already there. He said, digging himself a very big pit, which hopefully Prash will get him out of. I mean, do you think?
There was very much sort of a market for this, certainly in Soho. I mean, it was known at the time for several things: the black market, sex, deserters, that kind of thing.
In places like, for example, Soho, Piccadilly, you had what was used to be the respectable Lions Corner houses, which were these all-night restaurants. But when the war came along, they were being used as sort of de facto meeting places for selling and trading in black market goods, but also to pick up girls, or as the American soldiers call them, commandos or prostitutes.
Fair enough.
This would go on a lot. You'd also have a lot of raids as well going on as well, and I think it was very exciting for somebody like Karl Hulten, who had deserted the army, and because he had actually been left in charge of the motor pool while his comrades went to fight in France, and he.
Right. So explain. I mean, who's because Betty is there as a dancer, quote unquote, and in there, and then so comes. So who was Karl? I mean, is he American? Is he British? Is he Canadian? Where's he from? And how do their paths intersect?
Yeah, I mean, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can do this one. Yeah, so Karl Hulten was from Boston. He had grown up in a fairly stable household. They were very much working class, but had an ordinary childhood, known as a bit of a class clown. He did very much like chasing girls, getting his hair cut and so on. He got married, and he actually had a baby daughter just about a week or two before he was sent across, conscripted into the US Army and sent over to England. So he arrived in January 44. As Prash said, he was pretty bored and disillusioned because he actually wanted to go over to France for Operation Overlord. But he, being a mechanic, he was stuck looking after the cars, went absent without leave, stole a weapon, stole supplies from the army to sell on the black market because he wasn't drawing his pay, so he had to get by somehow. Broke into shops and pubs. And then their paths crossed. So Betty was already in London, as we said, working as a dancer. They then met in a cafe in October of 1944 and were introduced by a mutual friend who was Len Bexley, the spiv, the black marketeer. So he knew both of them. Right. And he just introduced them, and they agreed to meet later that night, and that was the start of their brief but very reckless association.
And presumably if he's gone AWOL, I mean, have people looking for him, but are there sort of more important fish to fry, as it was? Because you haven't got a full police force, because most of the men are going to be doing, as you said, being air raidings, blackouts, the whole thing. There are thousands, if not millions, of young men in uniform in the in the country and around London. So he's not going to stick out. I mean, he can be relatively sort of low key on this one?
Yeah. So he flew under the radar quite literally, because what had happened was when Normandy started up, effectively men and machine kind of just left London. So there was a depleted decreased amount of soldiers on the ground there. So he was sort of driving around. He'd stolen a 10-wheel US Army truck. And he figured if he's driving one of these around, people are less likely to look at him because he's kind of hiding in plain sight. He also had stolen a second lieutenant's uniform as well, and he had reinvented himself as Second Lieutenant Richard John Allen, known to the girls as Ricky. So that's really what he was doing, and that's how he was sort of going around. And he would go to British Army camps, American Army camps, and also fill up fuel there as well, under the guise of this fictional rank he was using. So that's how he did it. And sometimes he'd even go back to his base at Reading to play cards with a couple of his friends, and then he would leave before the guards came to find him. So he was constantly going back and forth, and that's why there's a differentiation between deserting and being absent without leave. Deserting means you have no intention to return to your base, which means effectively you're completely over the hill. Yeah. Whereas absent without leave, or AWOL, means you do occasionally return to your base, but it's a bit of a grey area because obviously you could argue he had deserted his unit, but legally there is a bit of a difference there.
And he's obviously got charisma and cunning, because, I mean, to do that, I mean, to be driving around in a 10-wheel truck and reinvent yourself as an officer, I mean, that is quite. And I suppose presumably he was able sort of to dazzle the girls, because he's an officer. He's not just an ordinary grunt, as it were. So they're like, because they're not going to say, "Show me your papers," are they? They're going to say, "Show me the nylons," or "Show me the chocolate," or the. So he's obviously cutting a swathe through this one, Melissa.
Yes, exactly. And he had already got another girlfriend. He had met 16-year-old Joyce Cook. Joyce Cook was actually quite a sensible young woman, and she took him home to meet her parents. So that's how respectable she thought he was. Brought this officer who she thought was 27. He was also saying that he was older than he was, and he would actually go and have dinner with Joyce and her family, and then after dinner he'd go out to meet Betty Jones and go out prowling the streets of London looking to commit crimes.
So two women on the side.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, so they meet. Are there criminal intentions? I mean, do they recognise that they are both, if you like, of the same, hewn from the same stone? Is it like, I mean, why do they decide to start committing crimes? And is it sort of low key and then it just escalates? I mean, what did you guys find out is the reason behind this?
Yeah, they were both very restless individuals. Even as children, they were very restless. Karl was something of a live wire, and I think there was an element of seeking danger. They were both bored in London. Betty at this point was out of work. Karl was obviously was looking after Motorpool, and obviously he'd gone absent without leave. And there was a sort of like an unspoken rule between them when they met on that day in the cafe in October 1944. Something just passed between them, and then they met up for a date. And one of the first things Karl said to Betty was, "This is a stolen US Army truck," and he also showed her the gun. And he did that to see what her reaction was, and she did indeed sort of play into his hands a little bit, because she then said something along the lines of, "I'd like to do something dangerous, like fly a bomber over Germany." In his mind, later on, he would say something along the lines of that she had actually meant that she wanted to be a gangster's mole. So in his mind, she wanted to be his sidekick, effectively. And they started off with a bit of robbery, and they slowly started to escalate. There was attempted murder of an 18-year-old girl who they left for dead in the River Thames, and then it culminated in the fatal shooting of a taxi driver named George Heath. So it was a steady sort of escalation, really, and they had no qualms about doing it, in blacked out London. They were just in it for the thrill of it, really.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the thing is, I mean, you mentioned the gangster film, The Gangster's Mole. That's a big thing in the 30s. I mean, there are, especially, obviously in Hollywood, there is moral outrage with some of the gangster films, coming out. So therefore, it is a very glamorous thing. And he might say, "Oh, she wanted to be a gangster's mole." Well, she's a kid. I mean, she's 19 years old, coming from sort of a boring place. Of course, a life of crime is going to look glamorous and exciting, and especially if you've got an armed American next to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think this whole glitz and glamour and the thing about being also he's a Chicago gunman, because that was another thing. Karl was going around telling people he's a Chicago gunman, and he actually threatened Betty as well, allegedly, that he had people watching her in London as well. And sort of that would come out later as one of the controversies around it. Sort of Betty would say that she'd been forced into it. But yeah, at the time, I think it was the gangster element that really hit the news headlines, and they really played on that and drew on the similarities with Bonnie and Clyde. Two young people driving around, committing crimes, some slightly poor backgrounds, also at a time of turbulence, because Bonnie and Clyde were operating in Depression-era America, and now you've got these two operating in sort of bombed-out London during the war. So both sort of times of great disruption.
But presumably, I mean, their spree, how long does it last for? Is it a couple of weeks? I mean, and it ends...
It was actually... Yeah. Sorry, go on. No,
it ends tragically in a murder. I mean, we had this attempted murder for an 80, and we won't go into the whole details because we want people to buy the book. But it ends in what was it, the cleft chin murder, or so?
That's right. Yeah, the cleft chin. Yeah, firstly, the reason it's got that name, just to sort of explain, this was a name given to it in the press. Because when they discovered George Heath's body, the only thing they had to go on was this cleft chin that he had, or this depression. So the pathologist released the forensic report. The police then released the story to the press, and the press went wild with it. They started calling him the cleft chin man. And there are other names associated with it, like the Inky Fingers murder was another one, which is quite a colourful one. That was the second one they came up with. That was because they posited that... the victim was a bookmaker, and he'd been shot at his desk, and he'd spilled over an ink pot, and some of the ink had gone onto his fingers. So they came up with these very colourful sort of monikers. It also had almost a gangsterish air about the title as well, because in England at this time, gun violence wasn't that common. I mean, of course, we had the looting, of course, but it had sort of devolved into this situation where we were seeing more Americanized crimes, for example. And I think George Orwell hit it on the head at the time when he said the Hulten and Jones case was very much seen as the decline of the old-fashioned English murder. We'd gone away from the usual middle-aged poisoners killing their wives and locked-room mysteries and Poirot-esque feel to cases, but we've gone into this now. It's more of these reckless crime sprees where there's no real motive behind it. It's only being done for the sake of a few pounds or shillings, just for the hedonistic feel to it, really.
Yeah, I mean, the thrill of it, probably, Melissa, and that's the thing that is shocking people, rather than, poisoning your landlady or bumping off your great uncle for money, which is a very, very sort of British crime, if you like.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And they got, got so little out of it. As he said, it was just a few shillings. I mean, one of the more sort of cold-blooded elements that actually didn't even make it to the trial, because they were only prosecuting for the murder of George Heath, so they didn't reveal the details of the previous assaults. But Betty had actually taken this poor young woman's camel hair coat and was wearing it around afterwards. And I think when you talk about the thrill, I think it's an interesting point to consider whether they would even have stopped if they hadn't been caught, because even the day after the murder, they went out again. They were looking to steal a fur coat from a woman because Betty wanted this fur coat now as well. And yeah, it's very much, they're in their own bubble. They're looking to have fun. It's a thrill. It's the excitement.
But unlike Bonnie and Clyde, there is a trial. It doesn't end in, a hail of bullets somewhere up the Holloway Road or whatever. So, presumably, that then allows the press to have a field day, and for you guys, obviously, doing the research, it allows you to paint a real picture rather than just what the press were probably saying at the time. So, explain a little bit, once again, we don't need to go into all the details, but this presumably was making the front pages, or was a murder at a time of war interesting to the general public?
It was, yeah. It was a very, very sensationalist trial, and I think mainly because it was a trial of firsts. It was the first time an American soldier had been tried in a British courtroom on a capital charge. It was also the first time a female barrister had been briefed in a murder trial, so that was another very, very interesting point. First time the BBC were there. The press benches had to be enlarged as well, because they were press from Australia and America and Canada had come down to see the trial. So, yeah, they really did have a field day. And I think compared to sort of other cases prior to Hulten and Jones, this one really stirred the interest because you had the international feel of it. You had the British girl and the American soldier, and it had a real, very, very interesting flavour, I would say.
And presumably people could bring their own prejudices to that. So you've got, wasn't it oversexed, overpaid, and over here, which was the Americans always told her. And so there you have this, this gun tooting sort of, and then he finds out he's been impersonating an officer, et cetera, et cetera. So he is sort of front and centre, sort of the if you like, the caricature of the American GI gone bad, and she can be saying, well, I was dragged along with this, and I just want to have a quiet life back in South Wales.
And that's what she did indeed try. She did try to say she'd been dragged along with it, but actually the public weren't buying it, and many of them were voraciously against her. I think there wasn't a lot of evidence that she had been forced into it. A couple of witnesses, like her landlady, came forward, and Len Bexley, the spiff who introduced them, to say she seemed really comfortable with him, seemed very fond of him. I think it was also, she was sort of held up as a bit of a symbol of that moral panic we talked about earlier with the Good Time girls. And I think maybe she was seen as sort of a cautionary tale. Look, this is what your daughters can get involved with if you're not careful. And so I think that was because of her gender and the societal values at the time. She, I think, got the rougher end of it, because they aired her sort of her relationships with men in the courtroom and asked them sort of very personal questions. And it felt like she was being judged on that a bit rather than just her involvement in the crime. But
you can kind of see that, can't you? Because of the mores of the time, and, women were supposed to stay at home anyway. It's a bit of a shock when they're having to go into armaments factories and whatever else and help with the war effort, the weakened, the women's land army. That's what you should be doing. You shouldn't be enjoying yourself with the people from the colonies or Americans whilst our brave boys, etc., etc. So you can project that middle class sort of wrath, or this is what women shan't do. So she becomes, if you like, a cipher for the dubious morality, you might say, of the time.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, and I think that's what she, what sort of followed her around for quite a long time afterwards. And then there was the film that was made in 1948, Good Time Girl, which the producer did actually say was meant as a cautionary tale. It was criticised from many quarters because of being sordid and depicting where she'd been at an approved school as a teenager, which used to be sort of known as a reform school or industrial school, and this film showed scenes of rioting and girls smoking and things like that. It was actually only loosely based on her and her life, but that sort of added to it. And then in 1990, there was another film made, Chicago Joe and the Showgirl, starring Kiefer Sutherland and Emily Lloyd, and that perpetuated this myth that Betty was actually the leading force and was the manipulator behind it.
Yeah, so Kiefer Sutherland played the role of Karl Hulten, stroke Ricky Allen.
I remember the film, yeah.
Yeah, and it was, he portrayed the role in a very demure way, whereas Emily Lloyd's Betty was much more the driving force, much more brasher and bolder, and very much the one trying to sort of bully him into doing these sorts of crimes. But in reality, it was actually the other way around. It was nothing like that, really. And Karl was very much, knew what he was doing, of course. So yeah, so this sort of label sort of unfortunately followed her around a bit, and. The truth is very different, actually, because obviously she was actually reprieved from the gallows with just 33 hours to spare by the Home Secretary. So from up until that point, she thought she was going to be hanged, and she was reprieved at the very last minute. And she then spent the next 9 years in prison. And then it was all a case of just coming out of prison and trying to rebuild her life, which amazingly she did, despite what prison psychologists said.
Well, you see, the interesting thing is that you've tracked this tale beyond, because it would have been, you could have said, so-and-so, this happened to so-and-so, and Betty did 9 years and that's it. But you actually were able to follow that up, which I think is really interesting, because we tend to, in the movie, you would have Betty lived, you haven't put a full stop at that point. So how did you get, because I would imagine she'd want to be sort of very, very low key indeed. So how do you sort of find that information, Prash? Because obviously...
Yeah, a lot of it is a lot of hard grafting, and a lot of hunches usually are the key to this, really. I've had experience of tracking people down in the past, and I do genealogy, so it's really my forte. And I found that, because we were fortunate enough to have obtained about 2,000 pages of records, prison records, personal letters and stuff like that, I worked out from there that she had actually come out of prison, tried to redeem herself. She'd worked as a nurse for the Leonard Cheshire homes, caring for disabled people. And after that, she'd gone on, she'd got married as well, and she changed her name. Actually, she changed her name immediately after coming out of prison to Elizabeth Temple. And she had a husband who was a Cambridge graduate. She had 2 children, and after that, she just fell off the radar completely. And I was trying to work out what had happened. So I went back to the old records, looked at the marriage certificate, and found her husband had been was a mathematician. And my next step was really more of a hunch. I thought, what's the next thing up at this time, this period of time? Well, normally the computer age is dawning, obviously. You know, IBM is very much a new thing. And I followed that line of thinking. And then I found myself, when I've exhausted the UK completely, I found myself looking further afield. Well, I knew she loved the American culture. And it was from there I was able to establish she'd emigrated with her family to America in the 1980s. And more things, you know, contacted records institutions in America, managed to find out when she'd passed away. But most importantly, this was the watershed moment, was when we found out she had a surviving daughter. So we reached out to her and we established a dialogue. And for the first time, we were able to reveal Betty's life, you know, with a family after prison, life in America, and also having that dialogue with her daughter as well was just absolutely incredible, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
The day we found out.
Did the daughter know about the background of this? I mean, presumably you would have kept that a bit quiet. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's wonderful you found the daughter, but on the other side, this is not the sort of thing that she'd perhaps want to bring out above her Thanksgiving dinners, for example.
No, the family always perpetuated the belief that she'd been treated unfairly in jail, and that it had been all just an accident. You know, the fact that she'd been involved in this. I think they very much ran with it. I believe they did it to protect their children. I don't think they wanted to keep bringing this up. But Patricia, that's what we call her in the book, because she wanted to protect her identity because of her reputation. She lives in California today. She wanted to know more, and I think for her, she told us one of the things that will come out of this book is, for her, it's personal healing, because she wanted to know what her mother was like before she got married. You know, what the crimes actually entailed, what she was like as a child. So we were able to fill in a lot of those blanks, and in return, she gave us some information in return about her mother later on, and it was really very rewarding, I'd say, and all that.
Yeah, Melissa, it must have been wonderful to write about when you've actually got. Okay, you haven't got first person, but you've got near as damn it first person, because you've got the daughter there. So when you're writing it, you kind of feel that you're writing it for them rather than, if you like, at them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was really emotional, actually, doing that, and sort of knowing that these relatives might actually be reading it. And in fact, something else, you know, quite incredible happened. We were really fortunate. This is like a researcher's dream. We were contacted by June Hulten, the surviving daughter of Karl Hulten, who had been born just a week or so before he'd been sent to England with the army. And she had actually found our website, basically, and knew we were writing a book, and got in touch herself kind of proactively and said she was happy to talk to us about her life as well. And so that was wonderful, because we could bring it full circle. And she's now in her 80s. And we were able to find out, you know, what a terrible experience it had been for the family when Karl was hanged. June had always believed he just died in the war. It wasn't until she was in her 20s she sort of found out the truth. But even now, sort of in her 80s, she was still sort of thinking there were some unanswered questions. And again, for her, I think it was really interesting to learn more about his early life, because, of course, her mother didn't talk about it at all, understandably.
Absolutely. I mean, the great thing about this book is it is not only the drama of the crimes, but also it's a time and a place, and you bring it through to the present day, which is a rare trick indeed. I could talk about it for a very long time, but unfortunately, I'm about to run out of time. The book is called Wartime London's Bonnie and Clyde. What are you hoping that people are going to take from that? Prash, I'll let you go first, and Melissa. What do you hope that people will learn from the book? I
think it's that these two protagonists have had a backstory before they got to the point where they met. And I think it's interesting to see how this all unfolds amidst the war as well. And hearing also about the victims as well, about their stories as well, I think is very, very important, because I think the human side to things is a paramount importance, really. And also, I think there's the redemption arc, isn't there, as well, and correcting some inaccurate information that's been out there in the past, really, about her. I mean, there was one rumour had it that she had died in the early 1980s in poverty. Obviously, in the book, this is not true.
Melissa, what would you like people to take from the book?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much about it being a human story, and that even somebody who gets involved in crimes like this, they can change, but also that it's not just a crime in itself. There's so much context around it and other people. The
book is Wartime London's Bonnie and Clyde. You can order it via our own virtual bookstore. Where can people find you guys online? Because you said there's a website. Where is it, please?
Yeah, sure. My website is prashganendran.com. I'm also on YouTube and other, like Facebook, Twitter, that sort of thing.
The book is called Wartime London's Bonnie and Clyde. It's by Prash and Melissa Ganendran. Thank you so much for your time today, guys.